Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel, and today I just wanted to talk a little bit about another book from the International Booker long list, this time Simpatía by Rodrigo, Blanco, Calderón, and translated by Noel, Hernández, González and Daniel Hahn. That's a bit of a mouthful, lots of names. This is a book that I hadn't heard of really, I think, at all in the lead up, and very much felt might be my thing, partly because of the cover, but also partly just because the sort of themes of it. And in this review, I'll talk a little bit about, so I'll go into some spoilers, but for the most part, this should be a mostly spoiler-free review. And when I do go towards the spoilers, I'll let you know. Let's get started on this book. So the title comes from a word that is sort of deemed untranslatable, and although Simpatía looks a lot like sympathy in sort of English, there's a sort of a secondary meaning that's somewhere sort of between sympathy and charm and all these various other things. So it's this sort of slightly complicated word, but essentially the core idea is that we have a character at the heart of this who has inherited or is due to inherit a piece of land and sort of a big house within it, and the sort of with the orders to sort of execute the will by providing a lot of space for dogs, and it's sort of all kind of caught up and tied up with various other things. So we know that there's this book by Elizabeth von Arnim that keeps on getting referred to, that is a book talking about how much she loves dogs and everything. And so all of this kind of gets tied into this idea that our character will be creating this sort of space. And right from the beginning, we sort of see how this is maybe more complicated than is sort of expected, because this is something that involves politics as well as just the dogs being there. So we've kind of got this slightly absurdist tale of this man trying to reconcile this all the while. There's this sort of slight fear of corruption and all these other things going on around him, and so suddenly life feels a lot more complicated than it might just seem to just have lots of dogs. Dogs will just arrive and be given, sometimes with these sort of reference points of, you know, this collar used to belong to this important figure, and you know, all of these sorts of various points. And so basically what happens is we sort of get this slightly bizarre book that actually for the first bit of the book I didn't fully understand or get on with, and actually it slowly charmed me as we went, which is probably, you know, the title, but it sort of slowly charmed me with how it sort of constructed this narrative, because we sort of get this sort of feeling as we're going on that Ulysses, at the heart of this, is this sort of everyday man, sort of everyman figure who's a bit kind of hapless and useless and has suddenly been given this slightly bizarre task to fulfill, and he is just a bit overwhelmed by it. He's overwhelmed by the politics of it. He is a bit confused about everything he needs to do, and that's sort of where he ends up with his life. And I did really, particularly sort of later on, this book I found was sort of a lot more absurdist and silly and fun in a way that I hadn't sort of anticipated. And dogs naturally lend themselves very well to that. But for example, and this is not a spoiler, we'll just get moments like a dog being given and immediately the dog just sort of pees on the floor. And although that sounds like sort of very base level humour, I think it's done really well in this book, of just this thing happens, this man's watching a dog pee, and just sort of thinks like, what on earth am I going to do? How do I reconcile this? And so actually this book slowly charmed me, and I see entirely now why it ended up on the list. But it is a bit of a weird one in the sense that it kind of starts and has this sort of look at first that it's going to be this sort of geopolitical novel. It's going to be this political novel that talks a lot about various things. And then it kind of pivots away from it. It kind of does its own thing, and seems to sort of indulge in some of those politics as well, and really explore some of those parts. And this absurdity kind of plays out then in sort of doing a comparison piece to between the Netherlands and Venezuela, where the book is mostly set. And so we see, for example, that the sort of approach to Venezuela, of seeing Venezuela through the lens of being politically corrupt or being unsafe, and particularly in a place where dogs are then treated as sort of disposable objects, these kind of flesh things. They're not kind of given, sort of love or whatever. They're kind of just, they're these sort of disposable objects almost. And that in contrast to the Netherlands, where, at one point there's a reference to there being no visible homeless people or sort of stray dogs in the Netherlands, but particularly in Amsterdam, but that you see a lot of bikes being dumped into the river or canals because they're so cheap that they're pretty much disposable. And so it sort of starts to almost address something through geopolitics there. I don't know if that point necessarily fully came through in the book, but there was something quite interesting there about how this is the person's metrics that he's using to understand the world, is sort of what is disposable, what can be thrown away. And equally, he's sort of at the heart of that. He's somebody who is dealing with politics where dogs are disposable, where there's a sort of an understanding that they can, if they're inconvenient, they can just be gotten rid of. I mean, in that in itself, I think sort of plays to the kind of idea of talking about politics and kind of heartlessness or whatever within it. And I think that is sort of how this book kind of operates. And I think that's what took me a little bit of time to get into with this book, the way that it kind of approaches politics almost through this naive lens, like intentionally sort of naive lens through the main character, who is sort of just bumbling through and trying to understand things. And meanwhile, the world around him is sort of on fire, and he can't really understand how to make it better. Meanwhile, everybody's giving him more and more tasks. And he's almost this sort of fantasist who is occasionally taking his ideas away and kind of writing them down in a notebook and sort of describing them. But in doing so, he sort of is kind of detached from the world that's going on. So I found that something quite interesting in that he is able to be the kind of the outsider that we work with, that we sort of understand the world through his lens, but we also understand quite a lot of the time that he's not fully cognizant of what's going on around him. But then also equally he's sort of trying to play up to that and not have any agency. Meanwhile, we can see that he's doing some things that are wrong. And actually, as much as I sort of want to almost go into spoilers and talk about it, I think so much of the book is better without that. I think a lot of what I enjoyed about this book is not necessarily the sort of specific plot points, but how it charts the sort of the way there. That this is just a book that really plays with this sort of silliness and something non-serious in amongst some really deadly serious things going on around him. So yeah, actually this book sort of, I at one point was really starting to worry about this Booker long list, because I read a couple of books in a row that I didn't necessarily enjoy, and I was about a third of the way through this and was not starting to get on that well. And actually now this is sort of, it pulled it out for me towards the end. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you have to say about this book. Please try and keep any spoilers out of the comments if you can, but really would love to hear your thoughts. Take care and speak to you soon. Bye-bye.